All right, good evening, everybody. For tonight, I just wanted to at least give a recording and an overview when we're looking at counseling versus performance. We have a lot of individuals in our group that are balancing dual credentials. And so, what are some considerations and applications? Before we get going, I think what you'll find from this conversation is two things. One, it'll help you look at what you know a little bit different. It's not really about counseling theories versus performance theories. It's really the application of them. Am I spending time really looking at complex human behavior, helping people make meaning of that, more from a counseling perspective? Or are we really looking at more of performance-esque routines, pre-game routines, in-game routines, post-game routines, habit development, things like that? I still might be applying similar theories, but just in different ways. Because whether you're counseling or you're doing performance, we really need to draw the line in one area. Am I diagnosing and treating psychopathology or not? Um, and that's what matters. Because as we go through some of the examples, I think you'll see it may change how you just look at your knowledge set and how you want to use it. Because when you're out there uh, consulting, um, it's just going to change how you present yourself, right? So the first part, that knowledge base, then the second part there, your business. For those of you who are running a business, do you want to brand yourself just as your philosophy and overview? Hey, I have this holistic approach. Or do you want to brand individual services? And if so, then we do need to have descriptors that look different if you want to go about it that way. And I provided examples to show you some of the pros and cons, even with individuals in their own community. So as we're going forward, let's address the elephant in the room here. This is not a shot across the bow at ASP. I think we just need to take a step back and understand where the field has been to this point. We're being led from a clinical psychology lens. So, like I said, the psychopathology, this idea of low functioning, high functioning, all this terminology comes from clinical psychology, and that's represented in our finding the right provider spectrum or continuum that came out a couple years ago. Uh, it's nice to look at. It really doesn't answer the question, though. What is the difference between performance coaches and counseling? Because the idea of a continuum and a spectrum on high functioning to low functioning, that is all from a clinical perspective. We're not really taking into other perspectives into account. And so if I'm a coach and I'm reading this, it makes sense, but I'm everything and all the descriptors are talking about highly impaired behavior, low impaired behavior. It's behavior driven. Everything is behavior related. You're not really seeing anything in the realm of what's the difference between performance training, though, versus mental health counseling. So that's a problem. Because we have one subdiscipline kind of leading the conversation, we're having trouble pulling ourselves out of this counseling um, mindset when we're talking to coaches and athletes. And so when we're looking at potential solutions to this, and I'll talk primarily from a marketing perspective. If you are employed, that's going to be between you and your employer on how you want to break that up. But it might also empower you to have conversations at the table if they're looking to expand their services as well. But what's fundamentally different about performance training versus counseling? This is something I want you to reflect on because there are subtleties in our education differences. And as I provide some examples after this, my background's influenced how I engage in this conversation, just like yours will be. And so a user-friendly way to start is for us to do our own reflection first. What do I believe is fundamentally different? And it's probably going to start with my knowledge and the application differences. Some will have overlaps, but it should sound different. But start there. What do I think is fundamentally different about performance training versus counseling? So here's an example. What is unique to performance that not everyone in counseling would need support on? When we're looking at performance, there's time constraints, there's specificity within the domain, certain skills. There's also unique cognitive demands. It doesn't mean stress and energy management isn't important in everyone. It's just the context around it. So there are a few things just at the top of the head that are unique to performance that I might want to keep in mind if I'm trying to distinguish between the differences. And then also, though, what are my competency areas? Because I can't be everything to everyone. So, what can I provide based on my education and training? So, this is two examples to move on from what's fundamentally different. Well, let's break it down a little bit more. What's unique to sport and what can I provide? So, here's an example. So, in my background, I did get additional cognitive psychology training, looking at things like memory and recall, learning and apprehension, different perspectives on attention. But based on that, here's some of the literature and expertise that maybe I could then deliver on. I'm going to talk about things when it comes to skill acquisition and habit development, the idea of accelerated learning, novice to expert. And I would encourage all of you to start looking into some of that literature. It'll give you alternative language to counseling language. It's routine centric, this idea of training versus trusting mindset. With do I have routines to manage my performance? Do I have routines to manage my training? It's just slightly different terminology, slightly different applications of psychology to provide some nuances and differences between just traditional counseling. So let's continue on with these examples. When distinguishing the differences, so now that I've reflected on my capabilities, what I think I know, identified some things, do I have working definitions that are different? And this definition isn't great. It's a working definition. It's something to start with, but we do need to have it. Now, since I'm not doing mental health counseling, I'm not really going to touch on it. My acknowledgement of mental health counseling is I'm not diagnosing and treating disorders. I'm not working with psychopathology or extreme behavior, but I can support mental well-being, right? Because I do see some overlaps between mental performance and mental health. And so I'm not going to not address mental well-being in my practice. It's going to be there, but I want to make sure that they're talked about different. So mental well-being is, in my opinion, our ability to manage some of our internal processes, our thoughts, stressors, our motivation, excuse me, as well as our relationships, right? These are things that have nothing to do with sport, but will influence sport. So if we address them, we can promote more mental well-being. When it comes to mental performance, though, now we're looking at the performance itself, the training around it. So how am I really managing sport mastery and learning? Like, so I can provide psychology to support that domain, skill and habit development, uh, common application there. We're going to look a lot at the routines again, pre, during, post performance routines, learning routines, because mental performance is about our ability to manage training and competition. Some of you may define it different. These are just examples to work from to help get the cobwebs going, or to knock the cobwebs off, excuse me, get the wheels turning. Here's an alternative example all the way. So up until this point, what do we know? How do we articulate the differences so we can have clear definitions to show our competency areas, right? Those were examples of competency differences. So these are some of the things we do. Looking at this and this, these are some of the things we do, right, when we're talking to athletes and coaches. Here's an alternative altogether. You could also just establish a clear brand, like I said, that encompasses a holistic, multidisciplinary approach. Just focus on your brand and what you believe in. That's it. Don't have to worry about it because you're not going to touch the psychopathology and the clinical work. Now, some of you want to go there, that's fine. But for the majority of you, at least from my observations, it's the challenge is how do I harness all this knowledge? How do I apply it in a way that's meaningful? It's up to you if you want to separate them for a branding and marketing perspective, maybe revenue things differently. Some of you have to separate it depending on if you're going to take insurance. So you can't, so you do have to kind of have a delineation there. But in general, though, when it comes to your messaging, your marketing, how you're presenting yourself out to the public, it's just about your brand. And I got some examples here of what this can look like. So this one is mine to start with. And then I have some others with some links that I would encourage you to look at. But with the name Mindset for Change, so that's the overall name of my brand. Um, but that's really come from or influenced from a number of different observations over the years, and the idea that everything is fluid, things are always changing, which means I better have the following in place: patience and self-compassion, especially for ambiguity, clear intentions with my goals, a recognition of when I get stuck, how I manage my relationships. Mindset for change literally represents, are we cultivating a mindset that can handle change, yes or no? Because from my observations, if we can't, that is the difference between why people are successful and why people get stuck. It's our ability to navigate an ever-changing landscape. Might sound cliche, but it influences how I dictate my approaches with my clients, the things I'm looking at. This may never always get to an athlete, but it does influence how I organize all that knowledge. So I'm able to pull knowledge from counseling theories, change theories, sports psychology to influence thoughtful training and support. That's just an example. And as you can see in the bottom, it's going to influence as anything from branding all the way to my assessment and intake protocols. Here's a couple others that I put on here. I'm just going to talk about them, just kind of keep it brief for tonight to give you some overviews, but I think it's really interesting. So Made For, very popular if you haven't heard of it. It's a 21-day challenge, and they're integrating different pieces of psychology and nutrition to play the long game is their pitch. But it looks a little bit more at deliver practice, habit development literature, not so much looking at, like, if you were to think of like a Noom, right? They're using CBT for weight loss. Made For is really a behavioral approach. That's just all it is. But it's towards mental well-being and holistic health. That's their shtick. But the brainchild behind it are psychologists. One was a neuropsychologist that took this approach to getting it done. But once again, still there to approach mental well-being, but it's just their brand, what they're about. Seamless Coach, this one, she's not so much from a clinical psychology or anything like that. She has an organizational psych background. Uh, but she's all about addressing burnout and well-being. Once again, another person talking about well-being, um, but all about values-driven decision making, self-care. Really impressive. But the brand is strong. Not really worried about trying to decide, am I mental well-being or am I more performance enhancement? These are just individual brands. The last one, Redefined Performance, you're going to see a interview with her within the next couple of weeks. She's someone in our community, but she has a counseling degree and a performance degree. Um, but if you look at her website, she's talking about how every aspect of our day to day is a performance. And so, how do we redefine that performance to reach our goals, whether it's actual athletic performance, career performance, overall well being? So, once again, no differentiation at all, not even trying to go there. We're just talking about how do we redefine performance, because every aspect of our life is a performance. So, a different spin on how we go about it. But I just wanted to showcase that for you all today, just to kind of get you thinking about, what is it that we want to keep in mind when we're trying to differentiate between counseling and mental performance. I think just start with the reflection questions that we had at the beginning. What is fundamentally different about performance psychology or performance training and counseling? Start there, and then continue on with, what can I provide? What am I competent in today? And also continuing to reflect on what might be some of the subtle differences of the actual client themselves. What are they experiencing that a traditional client may not? Start there. And as you get there, you'll find that your philosophy will also come into play here. But if nothing else, it'll help you either establish clear definitions in which you then can highlight your capabilities in a very different form. So instead of a spectrum, you're just going to have a comparison chart of similarities and differences. Um, because ultimately your services probably aren't going to change. It's going to either be one-on-one coaching or group training, but at least it can help you in the dialogue to establish the difference. Or alternatively, you're just embracing it. They don't need to know all of the degrees in the background. This is what I'm about. This is how I present. This is my philosophy to training, as you can see with the examples here. So I hope this helps kind of kickstart the idea of consulting versus or mental performance consulting versus counseling. And look forward to continuing to dive into this with you guys in the group. Thanks.